Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week we change up the format just to keep all of our listeners guessing. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to recap a story. So we're doing something a little bit different. Instead of starting a new story this week, we are going to be talking about what did we call it? The music of the spheres?
Yep.
The Music of the Spheres, the 3-part story series we just finished improving away. I figure this would be a good time for us to kind of sit back, reflect on what we've talked about, our ideas, where they come from, how we think storytelling should be done or shouldn't be done. Let it be known, I am not a published author, right? Reed, are you a published author?
No.
Okay, Seth, you got any big fantasy books on the New York Times bestseller list?
Nope.
That's okay though. We're still allowed to be qualified critics because you know what? This is the internet. We can do whatever we want.
That's right.
I
am a publisher. I'm actually a publisher.
Yeah, you've published some books. So like your dad's book and your brother's book.
Yeah.
I have read a lot. And I've done a lot of writing, just none of it which is published. And I know, Seth, you're kind of in the same kind of ish place. And, we sort of jumped in a couple of years ago to making this podcast, just kind of going at it, And I feel like it might be important if we have people still listening for them to know that we think about these things, that we understand that, like, all of our ideas are based on other ideas. There's nothing new under the sun. Even Dune isn't the beginning. Dune, he read Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, he watched Lawrence of Arabia and probably read Revolt in 2100.
Yeah.
In order to make that happen. So, I just figure we spend a little bit of time talking about this story, what inspired us, and we'll do this. I think we'll kind of do this from now on at the end of every series. Just a little recap about the story, how we liked it, what we would have changed now that we're done with it if we could have. So, I don't have a super strict way of this. I figure we'll talk a little bit. Reed, do you have any of your story elements you want to talk about that you had?
Yeah. I'm looking at this in kind of two ways.
Right.
There just the specifics of certain story elements. I'll pluck ideas, and usually we've been better at it in recent episodes over the past few months with attribution.
Right.
Whereas earlier on, maybe we just weren't careful with that.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if anybody got the idea that some of these brilliant ideas was my own, because it's probably not.
Yeah. Well, creative license, if you change enough of it, it's yours.
And then there are certain books that I've read that kind of shape the way I look at a certain story element.
Right.
And that is less specific to this particular story, but it absolutely entered in. And I was thinking, there's one book which comes out of my favorite genre. I think my favorite genre, well, actually it can be my favorite genre, or it can be the genre I hate the most. And that's historical fiction.
Right.
And the problem with historical fiction, of course, is getting it right. I mean, if you're going to put a historical fiction, you're making fictional characters and you're placing them in an actual historical setting. And if you don't get the history right, you're just really screwed. Yeah, I mean,
right.
And it's going to be horrible.
Or if you fail to represent, if you try to reframe certain historical aspects and fail to represent them as they clearly were represented.
Right.
And try to narrative twist, I think.
Yeah.
You can really sort of go off the deep end. So that would be, you would say, your favorite genre of books?
Bernard Cornwell, British author. He wrote the Sharpe's Rifle series. They were made famous by BBC, British Broadcasting, put together a miniseries and where they highlighted several of his books. And he started out with Sharp's Rifles, a story about a guy who was in the 95th Rifles in the Napoleonic era, fighting in Portugal and Spain um, for Britain against Napoleon's forces, which is
Yeah.
Napoleon had placed his brother in. Deposed the king of Spain, and they'd placed his brother as the new king of Spain, and then
Right.
the British decided that would be a good place to start pushing back. So they had a good relationship with Portugal, so they were able to land troops and supplies without,
Right.
and they didn't want Napoleon to swallow up Portugal either. So it was kind of like pushing back.
Well, this whole thing is just an example of your a type
Right,
of book you
right.
like.
And the thing that I loved about the Sharp's Rifle series that he was very careful to keep his settings right. When he was talking about a battle in Spain that actually happened, you know, he got the the events that took place in real life accurately, and the weapons that they
Right.
were
Right.
using. He wasn't introducing weaponry that wasn't available at the turn of at 1800, right?
Yeah, that's one thing I really enjoy about you is that I can pretty much ask when would so this is kind of like the timeline. What kind of weapons would they be using at that point?
Yeah, that's kind of a thing for me.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
tanks and airplanes, things like that. So does this episode series, the Music of the Spheres, have any of the
Yeah, absolutely. The first episode I was had Magic System,
right,
and I was just reading the fifth installment or sixth, I forget, of the Pillars of the Earth.
right.
And Ken, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I've never heard his name pronounced. It's spelled Follett. So is it Follett? Is it Follet? I I don't know. Ken Follett, I'm gonna
Yeah,
call him.
that's fine.
And he has this setting in Britain, and the and this cathedral, and the beginning of building it, in the 11th century, and then he places the stories, and some of the characters are descendant from characters in a previous story, a century before or everything.
Right,
And so this cathedral is being built in the 11th century, and he places his characters in the way people would have looked at things at that time.
right,
And one of the things that's interesting about Follett, he's not religious. He doesn't his personal worldview is not through a religious lens, but yet he's very careful to get what would have been the religious sentiments of the time
right.
pretty right. And when was working on this first story element, 3 episodes when we started this thing, I was just finishing up that book, and it was placed in the Napoleonic era. That's what made me think of Bernard Cornwell.
Yeah,
But this was around it took place like from 1792 up through like 1824. So it was like the lifetime of the main characters, and some of them fought in the Battle of Waterloo, for example. Some
yeah,
fought in Spain. And it was centered in England, of course. But it was during the late 18th century, coming into the 19th century, so 1800, the Industrial Revolution, textile industry. They had a lot of they grow sheep, they shear sheep, they spin yarn from the wool, and they weave cloth, and the whole textile industry. And as that became more and more mechanized, they had water wheels, but that wasn't dependable power. When water was high, the stream was rushing, then the wheels turned faster. When it was a little slower, they were turning slower. And you know so it happened over the time when they brought in the first steam engines to run the big looms and whatnot. And there are some people that were afraid of these machines. They thought that they were fairies, and that there were
right.
they attributed magic to what they didn't understand. And so as I had magic system, I realized that we were in a you know, kind of a futuristic science fiction kind of a thing where I didn't have a scientific framework for what the phenomenon that we were discussing regarding, you know, this celestial harmonics, you know, the music of the spheres, the the uh the resonance, we use the word often, that distance planets would give off and whatnot. And then this growing ability among a few people to be able to receive and get actionable intel out of it. You know, like,
Right.
oh, this planet system 100 light years away is giving off all this kind of stuff, which is consistent to an organized civilization rather than just a rock in space, right? And and so it was that very much influenced how I began to formulate the idea of the magic system. And then the other part of that is another science fiction story by Anne McCaffrey, where you know, the Dragon Risers of Pern, these people had been cut off from Earth. You know, they were really originally a plant, but then the factors on the planet, you know, volcanoes and whatnot, they lost the capacity to reconnect with Earth. They didn't. They were on their own, and they kind of degenerated or devolved, so to speak, into kind of a feudal, more medieval kind of thing with horse-drawn uh carriage, you know, wagons and that kind of thing. And anyway, McCaffrey, it became, I've read some of her stuff, and she had one story series called The Rowan, and this centered around people that had strong uh psychic ability so that they could communicate over vast distances. uh and and some of them had psychokinetic ability, so they could literally maneuver spacecraft into space docks and space stations and whatnot, and handling a lot of air traffic control, so to speak, but on a more cosmic level. So there you got a couple of authors that you know, influenced the way I was looking at this story.
Right.
Another word.
I mean,
Go ahead.
this is all behind, this is all what was composing up your magic system?
Yeah. And then I also mentioned like Ender's Game, you know, they had the Ansible, which was a technological mechanism for communicating that, that to speed up communications over vast space distances. You used the word uh
Quantum entanglement.
quantum entanglement, right? That was uh thinking behind that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, and then of course Dune, you know, the whole, you have this futuristic situation where mankind has populated the galaxy, and you got to deal with the problem of interstellar travel, you know, over. So how do you even navigate in uh faster than light, you know, travel? And so they use the using the spice, they would go into the pilots would go into a mind altering state where they could, where they became prescient, where they could, you know, see things before they could see them, so that they could steer around things that were happening in space and not run into stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Because you know, it's really, if you're driving really fast in your car at night and you're over driving your headlights, a deer will pop into your field of vision without enough time for you to react. Whereas during the day, you could see
Yeah.
the deer
Well,
way up ahead.
I think they describe prescience in the Dune books as like memories of the future.
Right, right,
So like some people have really deep prescience that goes really far, and some people have, well, like most of the guild navigators in the Dune books have limited prescience, so it only sort of attains, it only sort of pertains to some very limited things.
hmm
Um, hey Seth,
Yeah.
what was the stuff for your story element? What was your story element? You weren't here for the first episode. You came in through this to the second episode.
Yeah. So I guess I was going to try to interject early on about something, and I'll bring it up now. But kind of at the very beginning, where you said like, where did you pull all the inspiration from? Obviously, there's nothing new under the sun. We get that idea, but I guess I mean right off the bat, I particularly try not to pull right from something I've directly read or an idea that someone else has already presented. Now, often enough, I'll start explaining an idea, like, "Oh, it's kind of like this," and you're like, "Oh, that's like what they have in Dune," and I'm like, "Okay, cool, that
Yeah.
works, that's cool," But obviously, I haven't read Dune, so basically saying, obviously, there's nothing new under the sun, but not not all times do I take or try to come up with an idea that's directly out of someone else's work that I'm directly aware of.
Well, yeah, none of us are trying to take things out of other people's work, but it all, you're influenced by the things you're exposed to. So if you're exposed to lots of works, then you'll start to take things out of that work. So,
But I guess as far as for this one, um, a bit of a mix of things. 'Cause I had prophecy, and so I know one of the big, I guess, things that people would recognize as far as prophecy stuff goes would be the Bible, and how different things are presented there. Pulling some of the like
yeah.
almost an end time imagery where a lot of times, they'll be like, this seal is broken and like all these like locusts are out on the earth, right? And they're seeing something. However, like if you get into understanding it, this could be talking, right? He's seeing this in heaven. So this is a spiritual thing happening in heaven, right? And then he's shown something on the earth. Where then if people just kind of take it at face value and depending their lens of interpretation could put nearly whatever they want. So something that could be a new beginning could also be seen as a grand destruction
Yeah,
through
absolutely.
someone else's eyes. And so that's, kind of the
Well,
way that
isn't it true that like the in Genesis when it talks about the spirit of God sort of hovering over the face of the deep, like the one of the words used to explain the deep or the darkness is also translated as like a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
yeah, or like a post battle. So
Yeah.
one of those
So it's
things
like
here would be
it can be both things. It could be this thing or that thing.
so as far as a book, I mean, just as far as like an interesting thing to think about, um, something I had read, and forgive me, I don't know the author, but I think it was called like Children of the Gods. And it
Children of
was
the
about,
gods?
I think so. It had to do with like it was kind of putting some of like the Norse mythology stories all together.
Children of the Gods is the first episode of the military science fiction television series Stargate SG-1.
Is it? Okay, sorry.
That's really funny.
Well, I mean,
So not that one though.
so not that one.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Children of Odin. It could have been Children of Odin,
Yeah,
but
it's all good.
that could have been it. But anyways, the point of it being is it kind of starts out and it describes the ancient times of the gods, coming together, making Mount
Yeah.
Olympus and blah 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 blah. Then it has all like the escapades of Thor and Loki and Hildur and I might be getting some of the names wrong, but
Yeah.
anyways, all the different things in the Odin's ravens and the his wolves and then the
Hugin
I
and
think Fen
Mugen and
Hugin
Fenrir and
and Fenrir, Soul, the son that gets eaten up by, one of the wolves in the end time. And basically, at the end of it, and again, it's kind of compilation of like the old Norse myths. I kind of got to the end and was like, wow, this is like almost like they're talking about something that already happened. And when you get to the end, like Ragnarok comes, it's like they already know who lives and who dies. And then it kind of ends with the aftermath of this great battle, and then I think there's like two of the gods survived. And what they had done beforehand is they put a man and a woman inside of a garden and put them to sleep. And then after the battle, right, the two gods that were left woke up the last man and woman that they had saved aside to repopulate the earth, starting from, this forest or this garden that they
Yeah,
had
that's
kind of
fun.
encased over. And it was like, wait a minute, you kind of put that next to like the beginning of Genesis, and you kind of like, wait, what a minute, right? So one, these people are talking about it already happening. One, Genesis kind of starts out with um kind of this battle aftermath, and it's like it's formless, it's void, it's all been destroyed, and you have God then re-pulling life back out of
Yeah.
all the stuff that's been destroyed, right? Because it's like, well, where did water come from? Well, what do you mean? Well, it just started that, he created everything. Okay, there's a start. Well, then it just says that he separated like the water from the land or whatever it was. And you're like, well, it didn't
So
actually say,
water was there at the beginning?
yeah, I was like, okay, there was already this deep, there was already this water. I don't know.
Yeah.
All in all, to say is like, okay, so you put a couple things like that together and you're like, okay, so maybe some of these things are maybe older memories of things that would have happened, pre wherever we're getting a start from. Um,
Right.
Kind of with that in mind too. I mean, I think our favorite series is the Wheel of Time, right?
Yes, I
The
like
Wheel
it a
of
lot.
Time turns, and the age that when the ages come back forth, the age that gave it birth, you know, is no longer remembered, and so when that same age comes back, by the time that age was there before, it was nothing but at best, scattered memory of something non-understandable, kind of.
Yeah.
Um,
This is just this is has nothing to do with your prophecy thing. It just has to do with your sort of how your process for coming up with stories. That's all I really want this to
yeah,
be. Is just as we reflect on our story elements and where the stories went, you know, how do we come up with these things? So like I had the government type, right? And it was kind of weird. I was listening back to the episodes today. I had the government type, and the idea is that the government type is the definition of politics is the sum total relations between people. So it's like when large conglomerates have guns to each other's heads, how do people, human beings, just continue their daily life, right? But that's not where it started. It didn't start with a government type. It started with a pantheon idea, which was all the gods are constantly in this kind of, everyone's in this kind of lock step kind of struggle with each other, right? And the friction in between the gods' lockstep struggle is what caused the Big Bang and the creation of all matter. So they're kind of in this kind of lockstep struggle, and that the friction between them, the little microscopic area between the huge titanic powers, is what created our reality. We're just going along listening to our Katy Perry and you know eating our food and just kind of being alive, but like the reality that the only reason our universe exists, and then the story would kind of roll out from there, is that like the gods realized that something was created, and so they started to send emissaries. But I didn't get pantheon, I got government type.
when
So then I had to translate it over to something kind of like that, the sum total of relations of people that happen when the higher powers are at a standstill together. How
yeah.
will people still kind of figure out how to communicate with each other?
When you were talking about government type, what flashed through my mind, I didn't bring it up, but the a scene from, and I don't, is it the Dark Knight? Which iteration of Batman? I'm not sure I've got this right, but Morgan Freeman plays Mr. Fox.
Yes, that's the
Oh,
Dark Knight.
okay, and it's at that stage where he's passing out the syllabuses for the meeting,
Right,
and
right,
like
right.
the CEO says, "Mr. Fox, I thought you were fired." He said, "I was." "Well, what are you doing here?" "Well, I've got a new job." "Well, what would that be?" "Yours." On whose authority? Like and then, you know,
Yeah,
Batman, yeah, I bought up all, yeah, but we went public. Yeah, I bought up all the shares. It's all worked out. Don't worry about it. We've got it all covered. It's mine, you know?
yeah,
Yeah, and power shifts. And that's what I was thinking of. We've got these different here. Gotham City just kind of goes on, and whoever is mayor, you know, doesn't really matter. It's just what forces are pulling the strings.
Right, right.
Right. Anyway, that was just a. I'm sorry, that kind of an interjection. But
No, it's
Isn't
fine.
that general politics in general?
Yeah, that's just kind of what you were thinking of. And then let's see, I've got a couple of things here. The COT 10 members, I was thinking a lot about Doctor Who. I don't know if you've ever watched Doctor Who's Reed or Seth. Have you watched any Doctor Who?
No,
just
I
a
have not.
tiny bit.
Since it's like a time travel show, there's lots of things where like you'll meet a person, but then you'll meet that person again and they'll be like younger or older. So for my quartet members, which kind of morphed into them being these kind of ageless beings that were trying to help guide humanity, they didn't start out as that, but that's kind of where they ended up, kind of like the face of Bo, or there's a couple of different instances in that show where you meet someone and they're kind of like they exist outside of time, and so they talk to you really weird.
Yeah.
There's this video game that deals a lot with timey-wimey stuff, and like a multiverse style thing called BioShock Infinite, and you're playing the game, doing whatever you're doing, but then this like couple will appear and they'll be like debating about you and if you're gonna make it,
Yeah.
through this next trial.
Yeah.
Or they'll like ask you a question and you'll answer, and then they'll kind of mark something off on a chalkboard as they sort of talk about the probability of him surviving or deciding, and then they just like disappear again. And you're like, clearly someone is playing a game that I'm like not a part of.
Yeah.
I'm just like kind of going through my life. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at with the quartet members, is that they existed past the point of time.
Right.
They were trying to help people. The information that they gave the heroes and the help that they provided was based on them looking back through time and talking, and not just experiencing it
Yeah.
at the same rate or the same way we do.
Right. Yeah. I want to interject right here something. If I'd never met you, Levi, and I just tuned in to Wait It Gets Better, I would have no idea what you meant by quartet. I mean, I I had not read the Dark Tower series by Stephen King,
Right, right, right.
and I was aware like cop, but I wouldn't have connected up with, you know, I'd heard of ka as being one of the words that people use to talk about destiny or fate or the force that guides
Yeah, yeah,
the wheel of time. The
yeah,
wheel weaves as the wheel wills. But this idea that ka brings together individuals for a purpose to and it becomes a storyline.
yeah.
And that's the quartet. And you know I think of Kelly's Heroes, the Telly Savalas character and the Clint Eastwood's character and the Donald Sutherland character and the Don Rickles character they were like the quartet, and they came
Right.
together to carry out this great adventure, and it became the storyline. And
Or like the good, the bad, and the
the
ugly.
the thing that's funny about Kelly's Heroes was it was Clint Eastwood, and they have a scene where Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland, and Clint Eastwood are facing down this Nazi, like commanding a tiger tank, and they step out into the street, and you hear the music in the background.
Bow, bow, bow.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and it was really funny. It was one of those things that you either got the joke or you didn't, but
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just we use quartet as if it's something that everybody understands, and I wouldn't have,
Right, right. And maybe, we've kind of done some work at like being like, if you have quartet, you should give a little reminder of what that means, you know,
Right.
which would probably not be a terrible idea to continue to do in the future. So, um, let's see here. I just got a couple. I got a couple of works of fiction here that we mentioned or we talked about, or I thought about while we were sort of making this. Dune, obviously, for the navigators, for the resonance, for the general sci-fi. I would say you said that your favorite was historical fiction.
Yeah.
I would say my favorite type of books are science fiction, right? Not fantasy. Like
Right.
Star Wars is fantasy,
Right.
but actual science fiction. So you take human development and you push it forward however many thousands of years, and that's what you write your story about, you know? So a lot of Isaac Asimov's work, Dune being an extreme one, you know, obviously Dune isn't Isaac Asimov, but Dune being another extreme work of science fiction, I would say is probably my favorite. Not because I
Some
don't
Heinlein.
what? Some
Right.
Heinlein, yeah. I mean, even H.G. Wells,
Yeah.
you know, people taking the logical conclusion of human development forward.
Right.
You know, in the fact that like Star Trek is truer to science fiction than Star Wars or Stargate or anything like that, you know, because Star Trek does try as much. I don't really enjoy it that much as a TV show, but it does try to say these are the logical leaps, and yeah, they add in aliens and stuff like that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but they, for a lot of the technology and stuff, they do try and say these are the logical leaps forward. So
Right.
for an amount, I can have respect for them. Let's see. So Dune, the books that I thought, Wheel of Time,
Mm-hmm.
another book where the spoilers, this is the spoilers part of the episode. Another book where the bad guy wasn't really the bad guy. You know, the dark one wasn't necessarily evil. He was just,
I'm raising my eyebrows at Levi
yeah, he
right
was.
now.
Oh, because you don't believe me?
No, no, that's okay. It's okay.
Because he wasn't specifically evil as much as he was just the absence of good.
Or more specifically, the absence of light.
Oh yeah, or the absence of anything at all.
Yeah, the dark one. Yes.
Yeah. Doctor Who was another one that I thought of just because of the timey-wimey weird stuff that I was
Mm-hmm.
trying to throw in there. Battlestar Galactica, actually, for
Mm-hmm.
some of the space themes,
Mm-hmm.
but then some of the, like, I remember there were some themes in it where people could like hear music and there was like these weird connections, you know, especially when the spoilers when the news first hit that Cylons could look like anyone.
Yeah.
You know, there was this almost like immediate kind of there's this like immediate kind of uh tension between everyone.
Right.
Um, one of the things in Battlestar Galactica I really liked, which Dune shares, which then the the music of the Spheres also shares, is the like sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Spaceman Spiff has it, his
Mm-hmm.
daughter has it, the quartet members have it. You know, there's like this kind of this innate idea that we're here for a purpose.
Yeah. I also couldn't help but make the connection with Spaceman Spiff and Ashley and Interstellar with the
Oh,
Matthew
right.
McConaughey
Yeah.
character and his daughter.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the Murph. Yeah,
Mm.
Murph. Absolutely. That's totally true. Yeah. Her sort of being, yeah, called to this higher thing, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and he being called to the same kind of higher thing except in a different place and in a different way.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which I had to look up because I actually haven't read the book yet, but I will. It's called Nightfall. Have you ever read Nightfall by Isaac Asimov?
No.
Okay. Spoiler alert. I'm going to tell you what it's about, but you're going to like it anyways. Right? It has to do with the whole thing that Seth was talking about with the sort of the times change
Yes.
and we get kind of this rotational cycle. Basically, Nightfall is a book about a planet that has like 13 suns, and so it's never dark.
Yeah.
And scientists are trying to figure out why every 2,000 years all society collapses. And they find out that it's because they finally have an eclipse and all the suns go away and people go insane because of they see something. And they, you know, one, it's always sunlight, so you'd go insane anyways because if it got dark. But two, people like once this happens, all the suns go away because it's an eclipse, and everyone sees the stars, and no one had before believed that there was anything past the Earth
Right.
because they'd never seen the stars before. So they see the stars, and everyone kind of goes insane, and they destroy society, and then it begins to cycle over again. But it's really good. It's a really great book from what I've read about it. I've read a bunch about it. Haven't read it
It's
yet.
Asimov.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's called
see,
Nightfall. Yeah.
I've never read an Asimov book that I didn't
Okay. I thought you were about to
that
say
I
you've
wouldn't
never
like.
read an Asimov book.
No, that I didn't like. I mean, it's just, and when you consider when he wrote them,
I know, right?
how did you talk about prescience,
Yeah. Certain people, man, just have that. They just have that. I'm just looking and seeing when it was published. 41,
Yeah.
1941.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing. Seth, any other
Yeah.
cool ideas or inspirations you had? Um, any
I guess
thoughts
for
about
this
this
one,
story?
I guess for this one specifically, I definitely pulled a lot of like zodiac stuff. So if people are more familiar with zodiac stuff and go, oh, he made a blunder. That's not how that works. Then please let us know. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if
I
not,
thought all of
you can,
that was really interesting. I thought
yeah,
the whole concept of like when you look up at the night sky, it's like a flat disc,
Yeah. That was
and
really
then
great.
people are born under alternative discs, and when people look at the night sky and other planets, they see different things than what you see, and so
right.
then
So one of
accord
the yeah,
go
so one of the things with that is so you have something because I know I mentioned the Chinese zodiac. The
right,
Chinese zodiac is more concerned with like I guess you could say Earth and Earth's cycle, and
right,
then the other ones have more to do with the astrological cycle. And there's lots of stuff about astrology, and so that's why I say I've looked into a lot of different stuff, and it comes up in different things that I read about or study with different things, and it's just it's interesting. But yeah, like it has like the different astrological bodies when they're in I think they call them houses. In different houses affects different, people. Like I think I'd be Gemini. And so like certain astrological bodies are supposedly affect, moods, cycles, chances of opportunity sometimes if you want to look into it that way
yeah,
as the different ruling bodies that shape that astrological sign are in or in association with the other astrological bodies.
um, is this a thing you believe in, or is this a thing that you just know about?
Um,
If I can ask that question.
so I'll put it this way: it's something that I know about. It's something that I believe in somewhat. But
Yeah,
if you want to put it from a biblical perspective, I believe I want to say it's in Galatians or Philippians, where it talks about no longer being a slave to the elemental spirits.
yeah, yeah. I
Um,
remember that.
so two things with that. So one, if anyone looks into like the horoscope stuff, right, which is basically what it is,
Yeah,
or what gets a branch of some of the ask, because I think there can be a bit of a difference. I think between astrological stuff and then using it to like Gemini, this is your week to not get on a ladder, you know be
yeah,
prepared for that love of your life to finally give you like some of that. I think is then letting I guess you could say false prophets.
absolutely.
But the thing that I think also, so this is partly like something to consider too. I know I'm going in a couple different directions, but I know because we talk about the Bible a lot, and I think something that because in the Bible it talks about not doing the palm reading, and they couldn't go to the mediums and
Yeah,
the different stuff like that, and some of the horoscope stuff falls into that category. However, if you look at it there are truths to it, right? You look it up, and sometimes they can just do like broad. what do you call it? Like a broad generality. And so you read yourself into what they're saying, right? And that's definitely a thing.
Yeah, it's really easy to do that.
It's easy to do that. But I think if you look at it in a whole, there are things connected to it, right? The Magi were looking at, the astrological signs to see when, the Christ was to be born.
Yeah,
And if you look
absolutely.
at it, one of the astrological things is in the constellation of Virgo, the one of the planets, I think it's like Jupiter, because it's like the king planet, is basically in a position where then at a certain time it's born, like it's moving through Virgo. And so therefore the virgin is giving birth concept, right?
Yeah.
And so apparently that was happening according to how some people will look at it historically. That is one of the signs. And then there was like something else, and that's why it was 2 years, because there was like two or three different astrological things that they were looking for that would have been the sign that something important was happening. And so I think there's
So you
definitely
kind of
things.
believe in it.
Oh, okay. So this, it's not that it doesn't have effects, but if we're going to go about and put that as our God and base everything we're doing off of, the astrological humbo jumbo, right?
Yeah.
Which would basically be the horoscope. It's not that there aren't contributing factors that are real things that might be interesting to know. But if that's what you're living every aspect of your life on, then it itself then becomes a false god, does it not?
Yeah, I would say that.
That
It's
that
difficult
that
to know what is the like I'm a Christian, you know. There's a lot of cool things in like you were just talking about with the like mythology stuff, with like the Ragnarok stuff. It's like how, I don't know if this podcast, this storytelling podcast is the place to dive into those questions, but maybe on our philosophical podcast we're about to start, we can dive into those questions. But like, is it sacrilegious to look at those and maybe believe them or see that they might have some kind of credence? But I liked the astrological stuff that you brought in. I like the
Yeah.
astrological stuff that you brought in. I like generally when you bring in ancient, like I love Reed's middle ancient knowledge, and I love, Seth, your sort of ancient ideas. Like you talked about the prophets. I had no idea that that's how the oracles would work. Were they really just
Yeah.
were really good at aggregating information?
Yeah.
well,
But
I've heard several different things. One is that, like, particularly the one at Delphi, I think they say there was like noxious gases that would make them hallucinate.
right.
Um, you know,
So
and
acid.
again,
That's
it's
good.
Sorry.
basically, but I mean, if you think about like some of the to have something set up like that, and you would come across as, divine to a point if you had, knowledge is power, right? And so if the common person, had to wait for something to happen, but if they had the information as was presented in something that had come across a while back, that on top of whatever their spiritual insight was also backed up with um, curried information,
Yeah,
it'd be, quite powerful.
I think so. I
Um,
think it makes a great story,
yeah, and
regardless
that's
of
kind
whether
of
it's real or not. It makes it gave a little bit of flair that I
right,
really
and that's
liked.
what I was just about to say the same thing about, like, with the zodiac stuff or the different astrological stuff. It's like whether or not, you're Christian or, not, or whatever it is. I think to take something like that that may or may not be true or may or may not jive with your personal belief, but use an aspect of it that would make something interesting.
Yeah,
I think inside of a fictional story is, it's part of the story, right?
yeah,
Tons of Christians read J.R.R. Tolkien or, C.S. Lewis, and there's, quote unquote, magic, and some wizards.
Oh,
And yet, they don't bat an eye.
yeah. I
Um,
man, I have a
And so I
story about
think
that.
if you're taking, and some people take it seriously, I know they do, but I think if you take and you can appreciate the larger story that's being told and separate, say, fact from fiction or fantasy from reality, right?
Yeah.
Then, by putting a wizard in your story isn't so much as, let's say, condoning that practice so much as using an idea to tell part of your story.
Well, I don't know what you're doing now, but I don't need to justify my reasons of putting wizards in
Yeah.
my stories to anybody. So
Yeah.
people can take
I
it for however they want. Like that's
yeah,
fine.
I had a job where I was in the break room and there were several people within earshot, and one person I worked with that I had really connected with, and we just hadn't worked the same shift for a while, and he just say, "Hey, I haven't talked to you. How's it going? How are you doing?" And I wanted to convey something of substance to him without talking about things I wouldn't talk about in front of these other people so much.
Right.
And I said, "I've lost my dwarves, my wizard, and my way." And he immediately understood, like, where where that had me, and
Like because it's from The Hobbit.
yeah, and I got across, he wanted to really, when he asked me, "Hey," it wasn't just, "Hey, how you doing?" as a greeting. He actually was asking me, "How are you doing?" Because I I'm interested in you and how you're doing,
Yeah.
And I wanted to answer his question with more than just a nothing burger. And there was this other gal there that she was just a recent convert to Christianity. And she just went off about how, you know, you wouldn't you wouldn't want to have anything to do with wizards, and okay, I didn't know how to even respond or react to her. I just wanted her to stop talking, but
Right.
so
Well, that's the thing. It's the creation of art, and art gets to be exactly what we want it to be,
mhm.
and other people can consume it for themselves and decide for themselves whether or not it's worth it. What I like most is what I think not I like most, but what I think is really funny is that I had a couple of really good ideas that I kind of threw out, and we didn't end up going with them in a serious way. And that happens nearly every single episode where I or Reed or Seth will say something, or they'll have an idea, and we'll kind of be quiet for a second, and then we'll just kind of keep rolling, and then it ends up not getting picked up. We're just really kind of throwing things against the wall,
Yeah.
and whatever sticks, that's what our painting is. But whatever doesn't, we just kind of ignore.
I can't remember specific, but one of my very favorite episodes that we ever did was something where my story element just completely fell through the cracks. But we got a really rollicking story going, and I
Yeah,
just loved it. And then I realized, oh well, I'll do it. And this was actually my thought. Since we really ignored it this time, I can bring that one up another
yeah,
time.
I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
See, because like with mine, I realized my government type didn't dictate
Hmm.
the theme. It only dictated a feeling,
Yeah,
right? There was never any weird government people connections that needed to be worked out because of my story element.
right,
But what it did is it put you in a mindset, it put you in a place, because obviously we're just coming up with ideas. We're not
right.
writing the actual novel out, you know. So it's really up to the listener, to kind of fill in the ideas. And if you want us to write more stories, if you'd actually like us to write stories, I'm pretty much okay doing that. But I need someone to email me at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com in order for me to make that happen.
You know what you've just been saying made me really think. Two other There's two authors that almost always have a part in whenever I have hero as a story element.
Right.
And that is Tom Clancy and Vince Flynn.
Yeah.
Tom Clancy wrote mostly in the like 80s, and his one of his great hero characters was Jack Ryan. And he was a guy,
A
uh
man's man.
yeah, and he was a marine that
Scout sniper. He's a
yeah,
Navy
no,
SEAL.
no,
He
no.
could fly a Black Hawk.
No, he hated helicopters. He just about died in a helicopter crash. but he had to use helicopters. But anyway, Jack Ryan ended up getting kind of sucked in. He was a history teacher and ended up kind of getting sucked into the CIA because he had gotten in the way of a terrorist attack. And then the terrorists started coming after him and his family. So he had twigged to something that, MI5 in Britain and the CIA had not. And so he came on board and he got recruited by the CIA to become an analyst. And then through the stories, he ends up actually getting out on the sharp end of the stick. And, he's not an operator, but because he is the one that knows all the pieces, he gets thrust into the situation and gets sent out into the Atlantic and dropped aboard an aircraft carrier and has to kind of direct this whole, Hunt for Red October thing. And he's a great character. He's Jesuit trained, went to Georgetown, and he is, it's clear that he actually is a Christian Catholic in the traditional sense. He believes in, truth, justice, and the American way. He believes that as his place working for the government is to make sure that America is the good guys. So he's got to fight, not only protect America from the bad guys, he's got to protect America from the weenies that have infiltrated themselves into government in order for personal gain. Or
this is why I think we connect so well with fiction, Reed, you and I. Like, there's lots of books that I've read because you said to, and you've read because I've said to, and Isaac as well, my brother. Because you're talking about a fictional character right now, but he represents something that you believe in. That is my goal. That is my goal when I try to make these podcasts, right? When I try to write, is to make characters that I would want to know and that I would want to root for and that I would want to believe in.
Well, I got
or that I'd be honestly afraid of.
I got my story element hero, and then my next story element was goal. And
right.
See, I want my hero to be about what's good and right and true. And, like Seth, I has said, what's good and right and true is what God says it is. Natural law, there is a good and right and true. And it's up to us to find it. And I want my heroes to be about that.
Yeah.
Trampling injustice, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted.
Yes. Seth, you have any more closing thoughts as we close the doors on this story? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait It Gets Better review time. If you have any questions about everything we talked about, like book recommendations, like when is our new novel coming out, please inquire at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com or add us on Twitter at @getsbettercast. We will be back next week with a new story, and then after however many episodes it takes to finish that out, we will, of course, do another one of these reviews, probably a little bit shorter as we still are getting our feet on how to talk not about a story. Thanks, everybody. Bye.